This chapter, we look at the concepts of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So in short, we call this AD and AS. The framework here is not the same as demand and supply, although there are a lot of similarities, a lot of overlaps, all right? So in the case of demand supply, we are looking at specific market, right? We look at the market as a whole. So let's say the market for cars, the market for houses, it's for one specific product. But on the other hand, for ADAS, we are looking at the context of the whole economy, right? So this is the whole economy itself, where there are different types of products being transacted. There are different parties buying and selling. Okay, so it's at a bigger scale. All right. Now, aggregate demand, we define this as the quantity of output consumers, firms, government, and foreigners are willing and able to demand at each general price level, ceteris paribus. Okay, so first of all, demand is for one, whereas for aggregate demand, it's for all types of products. Okay, so it's meant to cover different sorts of goods and services. Also, for demand, we are only looking at the consumers buying products. Okay, so up to now, the only people buying things are the consumers, people like us. Okay, so we go for a haircut, we go for buy a car, right? So we are the consumers, we are the only ones buying things. When we come into the economy itself, we realize that it is not just about consumers anymore. We have the firms buying things, we have the government buying things, we have the foreigners buying things as well. Okay, so there are different parties buying things that will make up the whole economy. And so to understand this whole relationship, we capture them in an equation. And so we say that you have AD equals to C plus I plus G plus NX. So this will tell us the four categories of spending, the four types of parties who are buying things in the economy. And so it's not again just about the consumers or the households, but we look at different parties as well. Okay, so the first category, we have the consumers. Okay, so the consumers are the households, right? People like us, people, right? We buy things in the economy. Whenever we buy a service, for example, we buy insurance policies, right? Or we go for haircuts, these are services. Or let's say when we buy tangible products, right? Let's say we buy a bag. Let's say we buy a car, house. All these are physical, tangible items. All these purchases will be considered or calculated in the consumption spending. Okay, so when we buy anything, right, it will contribute to the consumption spending. Okay, now, what can actually affect the consumption spending? Okay, so not only are we interested in what consumption spending is, we also want to learn what can affect the consumption spending, right? So consumption spending, we say that these are some different factors that can affect this category of spending. Okay, so again, this is not the comprehensive list, right? This doesn't mean that there's only like 4 or 5 factors, right? But this is just to give us an idea of how things work. Okay, what can affect the people spending in the economy? Things like how they feel, right? The sentiment level. Let's say when we hear the news about COVID starting to spread into our country, and we're looking at other, let's say we look at other countries that have already started the lockdowns, started seeing mass spreading of the virus and so on, and you see that there are people losing jobs in those countries, we may start to feel a bit more scared, right? We feel a bit more hesitant. We are also afraid that this will happen to us in future, right? So the moment that this sentiments, this feeling, it starts to get a bit more negative, right? We will start to spend less, okay? Because we don't want to spend all our money and later on run into any problem, right? So we want to be more conservative because right now we don't feel so confident that we will keep our jobs, or we don't feel so confident that we will get a pay raise in future. Conversely, right, let's say the economy is coming out of a recession, right? People are starting to go back to work. The economy is starting to hire aggressively again. So because of all this, the people are starting to feel more optimistic, right? They will start to spend more. Okay, so think of yourself, because this relates to us, right? If we are going to get a pay increase, then we start to dare, or we start to be willing to spend more, right? But if we feel that we may lose our job, then from this moment on, because of that psychology, we will start to scale back our spending, right? So this will change the consumption spending. Okay, then we have another factor, which is the interest rates, right? Now, interest rates is actually a policy tool which we'll cover later or subsequently, right? But we look at interest rate now as a factor. So this is how much it costs in order to borrow from the financial institutions, right? Let's say I go to the bank, I want to buy a house, right? I want to borrow from the bank. So if the interest rate is very low, then it's going to encourage people to borrow, right? Like today, it's very, very cheap to borrow from the bank to buy a new house. Then what do? We are more likely to buy that house today, right? Because the monthly installment is likely to be lower. On the other hand, if the interest rates are way too high, right, then it may deter us from buying a house in this period because we see the interest rate is so high, the monthly installment will be very high for the same house that we are buying, right? So you are paying more to the bank. It makes you less willing to spend or even to borrow in the first place. Okay, so if we don't borrow, we don't spend. But if we borrow more because of the cheaper interest, then we are likely to spend more as well. Okay, so interest rate can affect the consumption spending in that manner. And then other things like the income levels, right? The higher the income, the more the people will spend. So here the income will relate to the whole economy as a whole. And previously when we looked at demand supply, we said that the changes in income could affect the demand for specific products in different ways, right? The demand could increase or decrease even though the consumers are earning more. Okay, if you best remember that, right? So we could buy more cars, but we may take less public transport when we have higher income, right? So we categorize into the normal goods and the inferior goods. So here in general, if the income levels of the economy, of the people, the workers are rising, then generally consumption spending will increase. Ceteris paribus. Okay, so assuming that everything else stays the same, right? No other problems, then with a higher income, the consumers are likely to spend more than before, right? So that will push up the consumption spending. Okay, conversely, of course, if the income levels, then people will spend less as a result. All right. Now, second category is the investment spending. So we may start to see some repeated terms here, right? The investment spending. So investment spending, just now earlier on, we said it is about the firms, right? They are buying machineries. Okay, so they buy machines so that they can produce more output in the future, right? It's investing in their production, investing in their future, okay, to expand. So in this case, the party spending money is no more the consumers, but the firms, the businesses. So the businesses are spending the money, they are buying machineries, and then how much are they buying? How much are they buying or spending? And how is their spending affected? So investment spending, what is it about? It is about the firms buying machineries or capital goods. How can the investment spending be affected, right? So again, similarly, just now we had the consumer sentiments. Now we have the business sentiments. Okay, so we see that for business sentiments, it is about how the businesses feel generally, right? So if the companies are generally optimistic, right, they see that in the next 12 months the business will be doing well, then they are more likely to expand. If they see that the economy looks a bit uncertain, we don't know where things are going, or we may see losses, right, it may start to scale back on the purchase of the machineries, right? Because it no longer is that profitable to produce. So business sentiment similar to the consumer sentiments as well. Then also interest rates will also affect investment spending. Not only are the people borrowing money, the companies are also borrowing money. And so when they borrow money, they are also spending on the machineries. So if the interest rates are higher and higher, the people, the consumers, and also the businesses will both borrow less. Okay, so they are both likely to borrow less because it's more expensive to borrow. So when they borrow less, they spend less. All right, or when it's cheaper to borrow with a lower interest rate, they are likely to borrow more and then spend more. So it goes through this channel where you look at the borrowing and then spending as a result. Then things like technological changes. So if there's new technology being introduced from time to time, the firms may be very likely to keep upgrading their infrastructure, their systems. So they may be borrowing more, or no, they may be Okay, so that is with technological changes. Okay, any questions so far? So we've covered two categories, right? We have been looking at aggregate demand. We look at the demand from the whole economy, right, in total. So this aggregate demand is not just from the consumers, it is also from firms. Okay, so the companies are also buying machines, they're also buying something, right? So company buying from company. So it's a transaction, right? So nothing to do with consumers in that case. Okay, so no issues, I'll move on. Right, next part to do with the government spending. So government is the third party here that is also spending. So they're also buying something. So for the government, take note that they are usually not the main spender, right? On a regular basis, when the economy is functioning well, they will not be the ones spending the most. Okay, so instead, it could be foreigners, it could be the firms, it could be the consumers, right? But hardly the government. But during periods of crisis, right, when the consumers are reluctant to spend, the businesses are scaling back, right? Even foreigners are buying less from us, then the government will step up and spend more. But that is with a policy in place. Okay, so they are spending more to achieve certain objectives, right? So the government spending is not aimless, right? It is with a certain objective in mind. So the government spending. Now, what can they actually spend on? They can be spending on capital goods as well. So for the government, they can be building infrastructure. So they are spending on highways, airports, or let's say they're building new hospitals and so on, right? So it's not a capital expenditure. Current expenditure could be them spending on products that are consumed now. Let's say the government hires teachers. So the teachers are teaching in this current period and the teaching service is being consumed by the students. And so the students are learning from the teachers. So it could be for current consumption, it could be for future consumption. But the government spending is the third category here. Okay, so what can actually the government spending, right? Things like how much they collect from taxes. So if the economy is doing well, the government is collecting more taxes, then they are able to spend more, right? That is one perspective. Okay, assuming that they are willing to spend more if they earn more. Okay, then the next one here is to do with, let's say, your fiscal policy, right? So fiscal policy is a chapter that we'll go through subsequently. So we see that for fiscal policy, this is where the government starts to adjust the spending or they adjust the taxes in order to influence the economy. Okay, so go deeper subsequently. So let's say here when they spend more, right, during a period of crisis, it is because the consumers, the firms, the government, the foreigners, they are spending much less. So if everyone is spending less and the economy is now shrinking as a result, we need someone to help to support it. And who can support the economy? Usually is the government. So when the government spends, right, it will be able to help the economy to recover at least faster. So if they spend a lot, for example, on giving people cash payouts, or they spend on the wage subsidies, right? Just now we give an example, then it could help the firms to continue operating. Or if the government gives people money, it can help the people to still have some income or some money to spend, such that they are able to continue buying goods and services. Okay, so nonetheless, right, I'll explain this more, but for now, just need to understand that the government is also a spender. It's also one category of spending, but the factors will also be different. Okay, based on what they want to achieve, based on how much they can collect, right? All these are different factors. Okay. Now, the last category of aggregate demand, right, or AD, is the net exports. Okay, so this is where we look at the foreigners buying products from us. Okay, so let's say we produce something and then we sell to foreigners. This will result in export revenue, right? So the more we sell overseas, the more that we are able to collect from the foreigners. So the foreigners are also a category of spender because they buy things from our economy. So we may not sell a lot domestically. Like in Singapore's case, the domestic consumers, the domestic firms are a smaller size of spender compared to how much we export overseas. Okay, so the nature of Singapore's economy is that they export aggressively overseas because we don't have a lot of people. So we produce, we manufacture, and then we sell a lot of things overseas. So we rely heavily on exports for revenue, right, for economic growth. In contrast, if you look at the US economy, because it's very big, it has a large population as well. So the domestic consumers are a very healthy source of growth for the US economy. So the US economy depends on the own consumers compared to Singapore, right? Because they have a lot of people and they actually rely less on exports for income. So you see that for US, because they don't rely so much on the exports for the economic growth, right? The revenue from export is a smaller percentage as compared to their consumption spending. Whereas in Singapore's case, right, our consumption spending by the local consumers are not as high as what we earn from foreigners. Okay, so there's also a difference in terms of the percentage. Okay, so all four categories will be present in any economy, but in any of these economies, they are in different percentage. So for exports here, right, we minus away imports because as we explained earlier on, imports means that we buy things from overseas, right? That means we are spending money and the money is going out of our economy. Okay, so it's a negative cash flow, so we minus that away. So exports minus imports, we call this the net exports. Okay, so the net exports is what we gain, right, overall or in net, right, from buying and selling from overseas. Okay, so how much or what can actually affect how the foreigners buy from us? Okay, so we can look at the GDP level, the income level of our buyers' economy, right? Suppose today, let's say Singapore, right? The biggest buyer from Singapore, they are the US and China. So when US and China, both economies are growing very healthily, then they will be able to buy more from Singapore, right? Because they are earning more money as a country. In contrast, let's say in the economy, let's say generally there is a crisis, right? There is a recession. Then in that case, the economy is not doing as well. They will not have as much money to buy things from other countries. So it depends on how much money the country is earning, so that the level that they can afford, right, to buy from other countries will also change. Then the other big factor would be the exchange rates, right? The exchange rate. Now, exchange rate, we can look at the classic or popular example of Singapore and Malaysia, right? So Singapore, Malaysia, because we are geographically very near, you can technically take land transport by bus over to Malaysia. You can see that, let's say, Singaporeans going to Malaysia, right? There's always a long queue because of the exchange rate. 1 SGD, right now is above 3 ringgit. So whenever the ringgit depreciates, right, that means 1 SGD equals to 3.2, 3.3, 3.4 ringgit, right? The more the Sing dollar can buy of the ringgit, the cheaper the Malaysian products will become when you come from the Singapore perspective, right? So as a Singaporean, if the Sing dollar can buy more and more ringgit, it allows us to buy the Malaysian products cheaper and cheaper. Right? So we are more likely to buy from Malaysia as a result. Conversely, right, let's say you are from Malaysia, because the Malaysian ringgit is depreciating in value, it takes more and more Malaysian ringgit to exchange for the Sing dollar, then we are less likely to buy things from Singapore. Right? So you may see that the Singaporeans will find the Malaysian products cheaper, whereas the Malaysians may not find Singapore products cheap. Right? In fact, they find it more expensive. So they are less likely to spend here. Okay, so the lower the exchange rate, the more the products are cheaper to the foreigners, and the more the foreigners will buy from us. So this is the situation. So if you look at exchange rate, right, as a policy, you can see that since exchange rate can actually affect the level of exports, right? Then some countries may actually use the exchange rate as a way to attract exports. Right, so you may see, not to go into names, but you may see some countries accusing others, right, of manipulating the exchange rate. So they purposely keep the exchange rate very low so that foreigners will buy things from them, right? Because with the lower exchange rate, then your products will now be cheaper to the foreigners. and the foreigners will come and buy more from you. So you are driving your exports higher and higher with the lower exchange rate. But as a result, because here you see that it is actually a zero-sum game, right? That means if you are earning, that means I'm losing, I'm spending. And so if this country is earning more and more from exports, it means that another country is spending more and more as well, right? So one side is earning, the other side is spending. So this country that is reducing the exchange rate and attracting more exports, it is causing the other country to spend a lot more to buy things from them. So as a result, that country that's spending more may not like it because they are spending too much on the imports as a result. Okay, so that's why you have some countries like, in a way, fighting or arguing and so on, right? Which leads us to the next point, which is the trade policy. Okay, so trade policy here, we are talking about, let's say, the case of protectionism policies, where a country restricts the amount of imports. Okay, let's say we have the case of US and China, right? They had this trade war of 5-6 years ago when they, let's say in US case, right? So it accused China of actually selling too much to them, right? Such that US was spending a lot of money buying the Chinese products. Okay, so in order to address this problem, the US government imposed tariffs or taxes on the imports of Chinese goods. So whenever the Chinese firms sold to US, they have to pay taxes, right? Whenever the Chinese firms sold to US, they have to pay taxes. So what this means is that they will only be able to sell to US at a higher cost, right? So it makes it less attractive for the Chinese firms to sell to US. So we are trying to restrict the Chinese imports as a result. So in this case, because of this policy, the amount of imports entering US will reduce, right? It will buy less and less from China because of the taxes imposed. Similarly, from China's perspective, because of the taxes that are imposed, they will be selling less and less to US, right? Because they are unable to sell as much due to the taxes imposed. Okay, so that is the implication over here. Of course, if you take all these policies away, right? Let's say we promote free trade, right? Let's say we take away all these tax policies and we have free trade policy. That means we allow any country to trade with us freely without any barriers, then it will actually lead to increase in the imports and exports, because now the countries are actually trading freely, right? So depending on whether the country wants to limit the export or whether they are very actively promoting free trade, right, it could also affect how much of the exports and imports that we experience. Okay. Okay, so now looking at this diagram here, right? So we're going to put all these together, the last part for today, right? So we say that for the diagram of ADAS, right? For the diagram of ADAS, we will plot the price level on a vertical axis, and we will have the real GDP on the horizontal axis. Okay, so if you compare that with the demand supply diagram, right? Demand supply, we plot price and quantity, right? Here for ADAS, in the whole economy context, we will plot the price level and the real GDP. Okay, so the real GDP is about production, right? So we don't use quantity, we will use real GDP, right, to represent production. And instead of having price, we will have price level, because the price level here will include all the different kinds of goods and services. So what happens is you have a downward sloping AD curve, right? So we'll just focus on AD or aggregate demand for now. So AD curve is downward sloping. The higher the price levels, the less that will be bought. Okay? So the same intuition as the demand curve, right? The higher the prices, the less products that be bought in the economy. Okay, so the more expensive, the less that people will buy, right? So at any point in time, if there is a change in any of the components of AD, right, it will cause the AD curve to shift. Previously, we said that whichever product factor causes the demand to change, right? Or no, whichever factor affects the consumers, it will affect the demand curve. Let's say changes in the consumer's income, or let's say changes in the taste and preferences, right? It will affect the demand for specific products in the markets. Right now, because we have 4 categories of spending, we have 4 groups of buyers. So any factors that affects any one of these groups will cause the AD curve to shift. So when it shifts to the right, it means increasing, going up. When it shifts to the left, it means decreasing, going down. So for example, if the investment spending is going up, right, and everything else stays the same, then there will be increase in AD. Or let's say there is increase in consumption spending, then everything else the same, there will also be an increase in the AD. So when we are looking at the questions or the context, we will need to know what is the specific factor here. What factor is affecting AD, right? Is it affecting the consumers? Is it affecting the firms or the government or the foreigners? Okay, so we need to be clear on those. Then we're able to see how it affects AD overall. So that is the understanding of the intuition over here. All right. Any questions up to now? Okay, so we're going to go on to the aggregate supply side. So we've talked about aggregate demand, AD. So now we're going to come on to the AS side. All right. So in the AS side, let me just come on to this portion here, right, to make it simple. So AS, we have two versions, right? We have two ways of drawing. So because there are two ways of drawing, the explanation, the story behind them will be different. Okay, so just going to focus on this way, this method, right? We call this the Keynesian view. So what happens is we're going to split the aggregate supply curve into three parts. Okay, so you can see here, right, it's all nicely color-coded. You have the Keynesian curve, the Keynesian range, right? This is the whole range. We have the intermediate range, and we have the classical range. Okay, so we have the three parts or the three ranges of this curve. So every time we draw, we're going to draw all three, okay, or all three parts, right? So this entire thing will make up one curve. Okay, but the way that we explain will be different, right? Depending on which range we are falling into. Right? What we mean here is this entire thing is the AS curve, aggregate supply, but where do we place our aggregate demand, right? That makes a bit of a difference. Okay, so you can place your aggregate demand curve on the green one. If it shifts within the green one, versus if you started from the black one and it shifts within the black one, the outcome will be different. Okay, so that's why we have like three scenarios in that sense. All right. So first of all, we'll look at the green one first. So the green one, the Keynesian portion, you can see that it is flat, right? It is flat. Okay, you can see here, so it's flat. So suppose now you have the downward sloping AD curve, right? It is shifting just within this range. Okay, so if you can see my mouse, right? Suppose it starts here and it shifts right. The AD curve shifts right. So it moves or it goes to the right side, right? Or it goes again to the right side. So within this range, what we observe is whenever the AD curve increases, or let's say the AD increases, right? More and more people in the economy, they are buying all sorts of products. Within this range, the increase in aggregate demand is not going to raise the price levels. Okay, so if you see here, right, because it's horizontal, whenever we shift, there is no increase in the price level, which means even if more people are buying things, it will not lead to inflation. It will not lead to higher prices, but instead it is just going to lead to higher production. Okay, so if you look at the two axes, right, here on the vertical axis is price level. So this is where we look at the price level changes or the inflation levels. So inflation, there is no change, because within the horizontal section, it is just stagnant prices, okay? However, if you look at this horizontal axis, right, the GDP is rising. That means we are increasing our production as we increase aggregate demand. Okay, so what is so special, so unique about this Keynesian range, right, this horizontal part? So within this range, we say that the economy is now experiencing some sort of a recession or some sort of a higher unemployment. So within this period, there are many people who are without jobs, right? Let's say during COVID, when it first started, many people lost their jobs or they couldn't work, right? So they became idle resources, not doing anything. So let's say now we are within that period and suddenly, right, or let's say gradually, we start to experience higher and higher aggregate demand, right? So as time passes, you realize that consumers come back to spend money. Let's say the foreigners also come back and buy things from us, right? So more and more purchases. from the local firms. So as that happens, right, as the aggregate demand increases, what happens is the firms will start to produce something, right? So from producing very little, and they start to increase their production, right? So that is where we see the higher and higher real GDP. Okay, so as we shift right, we are registering a higher and higher GDP. But at the same time, why is it that price levels are remaining constant, right? Because technically, if you look at demand curve, right, if you recall back, the higher demand, the higher the price. And so if everyone is rushing to buy something, that gives the firms some power to raise prices, right? Like what we saw with the face masks, right? When COVID first started. So why is it that prices are remaining stable? Because during this period, there are many idle resources. So a lot of people are not working. So when we come back and start producing, these people are okay, right? Let's say in this context, let's say they're okay accepting the current price or the current wages, right? Do we need to spend more and more money to hire these workers? Not really, right? Because they were without jobs. So they are more desperate. They are not going to negotiate for higher pay as long as they have a job, right? Or let's say the workers are already employed, but they are not doing anything, right? They are just slacking around. So once we get them to start doing something, then you see that the price levels will not change because we are not paying them more, right? You're simply just getting them to start producing. So they are doing more things, but the salary remains the same, right? Because there is no extra wages paid to them. Okay, so that is within the Keynesian range, all right? Now, let's say we keep producing, right? And the AD now goes from the green to the red zone, all right? The red zone. So the red zone, we call this the intermediate range, right? So the intermediate range is where it starts to slope upwards. Okay, so what's different between the green and the red is the green one, this is just horizontal, whereas the red one here, it is upward sloping. So upward sloping is saying that as your aggregate demand curve keeps shifting, right, there will be changes in both the price levels and the real GDP. Okay, so suppose now my AD curve is somewhere here, right? This is the intersection point, and it shifts rightwards. So it shifts to this rightwards, right? So you can see that as I shift, as my cursor is now changing position, right? You can see that it will intersect and give us a different price level and different GDP. So it will result in a different price level and a different real GDP. So that means as your AAD is adjusting, it will lead to differences in the price levels or inflation and also real GDP or production. Okay, so within this range, what we are saying is now the economy is sort of back on track, right? So it is no longer facing unemployment issues. It is no longer facing recession issues, right? So everything is sort of like, okay, so the workers are working as usual. The unemployment level is lower than before. So let's say now the aggregate demand is continuing to rise, right? So you still have more and more people buying things, then what's going to happen is it will lead to inflation. Why? Because when people keep buying things, the firms are able to raise prices, right? Just like if this item is very popular, we can raise the price to earn more money, right? So now it's still happening. More and more people are still buying, so the firms are starting to raise prices. And also at the same, because we still have some people not working, or let's say in the whole economy, right, there are still people looking for jobs. So if you want to produce more, if the company wants to expand, then we just simply hire more and more people, right? More and more workers. So as you hire more, the firms need to pay higher salary, right? Or more wages. Because if I hire 5 workers versus 50 workers, for 50 workers, the firms will be spending more on the salary, right? So in that case, the wages will have to go up because the firm is spending more, and then they have to pass on to the consumers by raising the prices. So that is within the intermediate range, right? This is the second part. Now, the third part here, we are talking about the classical range. So classical range, this is a vertical portion, right? The vertical portion of the AS curve. Now, within this curve, within this range itself, if you realize, no matter how your aggregate demand curve shifts, let's say looking at my cursor, right, my mouse here, you can see that wherever I go, only the price level is changing, right? Either it's going higher or it's going lower. And the GDP on the horizontal axis, this part, there is no change. So as I'm changing the position of my cursor, my mouse, the only thing changing is just the price levels. Okay, so why is that? Now, within this range, we say that the resources in the economy are more or less used up. Right? So suppose now, in a very extreme case, there are not many people left to, let's say, find jobs. So more or less everyone who wants to work has a job. And at the same time, let's say the natural resources, the raw materials, all that we are using are also more or less exhausted. So in order for the firm to continue to produce more, because the resources are so limited, they will have to raise the prices, or let's say the salary, higher to attract the workers from other companies. So we are unable to find, let's say a doctor. We want to find a doctor, we want to expand our hospital. But there are not many doctors left unemployed and not many workers looking for a job, right? Or doctors looking for a job. So what we do, we have to poach them from other hospitals. So when you're doing that instead, because there are not so many unemployed doctors, you have to offer a very high salary, right? Because these doctors are already working somewhere. And if you want the good ones, then their salary is already high and you have to offer them even higher, right? Just to get them to work for you. So in that case, because of the lack of additional resources in the economy, the price levels will start to go up rapidly. So within this range, we are typically showing that the inflation is very high. The prices it can go up a lot non-stop, while at the same time, production is hardly changing. If I'm going along this black range, the price level is the only thing changing, but the real GDP below, you can see is remaining around 210, right? There is not much difference in terms of the production because we cannot be producing more, right? Because not enough resources. Okay, but we can reallocate resources because we can buy them from other companies or we can poach the workers from other companies, right? So then in that case, only the price levels will be changing. Okay, so with that, this would be the three ranges, the three sections of your AS curve. So it depends on where you cut the, let me see if I can find here. Yeah, okay, here, right? So you can see this portion. So if we draw it more, let's say, without really clearly sectioning out the three portions, right? You can draw your AS curve in this manner, right? So you can see that the difference between the green and the red, right? The Keynesian and the intermediate is a bit more blurred, right? They just draw it as a curve, whereas for the vertical part, it's quite obvious, right? So you can see that within this portion, right? Let's say from here, 81, 82, 83, they are intersecting more along the upward sloping portion, right? So the intermediate range. So within this, you can see that there are differences in the price levels and also the real GDP. But if it's more on the left side, then when the AD curve is shifting, it will hardly affect, it will not affect the price level if it's along the horizontal side. Whereas on the vertical side, if we are shifting around here, then we are not going to see changes in the real GDP. Okay, so that will be for ADAS, right? The rough structure, the rough framework. Any questions so far? Okay, so from here, we will need to know how this framework works, right? What are the four components of your AD? And then what can cause your AD to change, right? Whether it's increase or decrease, or whether it affects the consumers, the firms, the government, or the foreigners. Then for AS, we will need to talk about how the three sections are in place, right? And then where are we looking at when we explain the question? Okay, so again, you don't have to draw the diagram, but we need to recall that right now for the context of this question, right? Where is the AD curve going to cut or intersect the AS curve at? Okay. Then also for AS curve, right? For AS, we split them into the short run and the long run. Okay, so we split into the short run and the long run, right? So for this, let's come back to this section here. For this AS curve, right, we have the green and the red portions. So the green and red, right, from the horizontal coming onto the upward sloping, this portion, we will call it the short run portion, right? The short run AS, right? Short run aggregate supply. So this will be the SRAS portion. Whereas for the black one here, this will be the long run AS portion. So there's a short run and there's also a long run. Okay, so the short run will be green and red. The long run will just be the black one. All right, so here they have actually separated out. So if you see here SRAS, this is the short run. So we will just draw the upward sloping one. Okay, or the upward sloping curve, right? Because it's just the upward sloping portion. Whereas for the long run AS, it is the, you can see here, where is it? Yeah, this one. Okay, so the long run will just be the vertical portion, right? So why we say there are two versions. So one is where we combine all into one curve. The other one is we split into two curves. So this is different way of drawing. Now, in terms of short run, we say that why is it that the short run curve can shift, or what affects the short run? You can see here that it can shift left, right? It can shift left, it can shift right. So it is because of the differences in the cost of production. So SRAS, or the short run AS, it will be affected by changes in the cost of production. So suppose today the government raises GST, right? So if you are producing any product, if you are buying any raw materials, you will have to pay GST first as a producer, right? So if you are producing something, you have to buy raw materials, you have to hire workers, you have to pay GST. So the GST is going to raise the firm's cost, and that is going to reduce the SRAS, right? It's going to reduce your aggregate supply. Conversely, let's say the government reduces the GST. Okay, not happening here, but let's say they cut the GST, then it will reduce the cost of production. Okay, then the firms will see it as more profitable to produce, so they will increase production. Okay, or let's say things like the Russian-Ukraine war. Okay, so this disputes, or this war between them broke out, right? And then it affected the cost of the raw materials, things like your oil, and because Russia produces a lot of oil, right? So when they are out in war, then the supply of this is now reduced. So any country, any firms buying this natural resource as the factor of production, as a resource, they will now see that it costs more because there is less produced. So with the higher cost, the SRAS is also affected. Okay, so anything to do with the cost of production, it will affect the aggregate supply, right? The short run aggregate supply, SRAS. What about the long run aggregate supply? The long run here, or rather this just the vertical portion, we are looking at how much the economy can produce at the maximum. Okay, so you can see in this diagram, right? This one just more simple, the long run AS. Below here, there is this YF. Okay, below here, there is this YF. So the YF here, it indicates the potential output. Okay, or we call this the full employment output, right? Suppose now the workers in the economy, they are working as efficiently as possible. Okay, so in this case, we're not saying that every single person in the economy is working, right? Not like that. But rather everyone, right, who wants to work, who is able to work, they were looking for a job and they have found a job, only including these people, right? If they want to work and they can find a job. So if that is the case, then where can the economy produce until? Okay, so we are not including people like students, housewives, retirees, all that, right? So we don't include them. But only the people who want to work, they are able to work. And suppose all of them find a job, where can the economy produce until, right? So think of it as sort of like a boundary, a maximum production level. This is indicated by the RAS. Now, suppose we want to produce more at the maximum, right? We want to raise this level of production, as you can see here, from LRAS to LRAS, we want to increase the maximum. Then what we do is we have to raise the quality and the quantity of the factors of production. Okay, again, if you want to produce more at the maximum, that means you want to raise your maximum capacity. What we have to do is to raise the number or the quality of the resources you have. So let's say a company, let's say a economy, right? They start to take in more foreign workers, or they start to take in more foreign expats, right? So they to fill out all the jobs at different levels. So because there are now more workers in the economy, more output can be produced than before. Okay, so that's one channel, right? Let's say Singapore, right? There is this scheme called the Skills Future. So the government launched this in 2016. So all the adults, right, once they turn 25 years old, they will be entitled to this. I think it starts from about $500 or $1,000. So it's a subsidy for all the adults to undergo training, right? Whether you sign up for a short-term course or you go for another degree, right? All sorts of such education and training, you will be able to offset the cost. You cannot use it to buy things in real life, right? But if you do sign up for a course, you can actually use this to pay off. All right, so instead of forking out yourself, you can actually use this money to pay for the training fees. Okay, so suppose this policy works in the intended way, and then it is going to get people to go for more training, because some training may not be free, right? If they cost less than $1,000, so people go for training, they go for courses, their skill level will upgrade, right? So last time we were used to using, let's say, Microsoft, right? Excel, PowerPoint. Now, after the training, we know how to use AI, right? To generate documents, to generate slides much faster. So because of this training, and now we learn the skills to work with AI, the output level in the economy can now increase. So the maximum can now increase because the workers are capable of producing up to that level. Okay, so just to wrap up, right? SRAS is about cost of production. Let me zoom back. Okay, so SRAS is more about cost of production. So anytime there are changes in the cost of production, it's going to affect the SRAS. Anytime there is any factor that affects the quality and the quantity of your factors of production, your resources, then it will shift the LRAS curve, or it will affect the LRAS instead. Okay, so you can see here, right? Changes in quantity, quality of factors of production. Okay, so it's affected by different things. So the question could ask you like, today the government announces a scheme, right, to subsidize education. Okay, so explain what will happen in the economy. So in that case, you can actually shift the LRAS because we are going to likely experience an increase in the quality of labor, right? So once they go for training, the quality of the labor will go up. They can contribute more to the economy at the maximum. So that will be the case with RAS. All right. So again, any questions you guys have, let me know. Now, let's say we were to actually combine all together into this diagram. So what we see here is a combination of everything that we have explained. So we have the AD curve that's going downwards. We have the SRAS curve that's going upwards. And we also have the LRAS curve. All right. Now I can draw, if let's say we were to draw and we draw this version, right? This is what we draw. Suppose now we are drawing the other one where we combine all into one curve. Then let's say if you draw, right, then you can just decide where to position your AD curve. So you don't need to draw them separately. Okay, so there are two versions, right? So this one is where they combine everything into one. Then here is where they split into SRAS and LRAS. So it becomes two curves. Okay, so what happens now is we can also look at the situation in the economy. So previously we looked at the curves separately, the concept separately. Now we can combine together. So we have SRAS and AD curve intersecting. So we have SRAS and also AD curve intersecting. So you realize there's an intersection point here, right? So this intersection point tells us what the current price level in the economy and the current real GDP, the economic growth is at currently. So you can see you can follow up. So here the current price level, and here is the current real GDP, right? So based on the AD and the SRAS, in these two curves, we can see the current inflation and also the current economic growth rate. Okay, now let's say we want to compare against a benchmark, right? Because previously, when we talked about the macroeconomic objectives, right, the previous chapter, we say that the government aims for certain things. So it has to have certain objectives so that we know whether we are getting what we want. And if you don't, the government has to implement policies. So the first thing is you have to be very clear what you are after. So one goal of the government is to achieve high economic growth. So in that case, how do we show that on a diagram? How do we know where the benchmark is? We will look at the LRAS curve. You have LRAS alone, right? LRAS alone will give us the benchmark This is the potential output. So we call this the potential output. And the intersection between SRAS and the AD curve will give us the actual output. Okay, so you have the actual, which is what the economy is currently really actually producing at. Okay, this is at the intersection point. So here, this is your real GDP level. But the benchmark, right, or the optimal, the ideal level to produce at is here, the light blue line here, right, the RAS level. So you can see that if you compare these two, right, we are not achieving the benchmark yet, right? We are underperforming. So let's say now let's say quiz, right? The quiz is 30 marks, full marks. Optimally, right? Let's say optimally, we should be getting 30 out of 30. Okay. So if we were getting only 20, right? 20 marks out of 30 marks, it's still not too bad. But in that case, based on this story, we are not optimizing because we haven't gotten full marks yet, right? That means we have lost 10 marks. We didn't get the 10 marks. So this will become a problem, right? Because we want 30 over 30 for the quiz, but we only get 20 over 30, right? So we are experiencing a problem. So for the economy here, we say that we are facing a recessionary gap. So the gap is between these two levels, okay? Your actual output versus your potential output. So the actual here, again, this is where the cursor is. This is the actual. Potential is here, right? The light blue line. So we are not getting the potential. That means you are not performing to your best. What happened? Right? There could be some resources that are not used. There could be a lack of aggregate demand for goods and services, right? Because of certain reasons like COVID, people are not buying as much as before. People are not buying as much as they should be. So the economy is not producing where it should be. So we are underperforming. So if let's say we see this diagram, then we should know that they have a recessionary gap. The economy is experiencing a recession. The economic growth rate is not as high as it should be. It is on the lower side. And at the same time, the more that we produce, the more workers will be hired. So there's also a relationship. So if you're producing more output, there will be more workers that will be employed to do the work. But if the firms are not producing much, they don't need more workers, right? Or they don't need so many workers. So they will lay off the workers or they stop hiring. Okay, so there'll be more workers left unemployed. Right? So this diagram will show us a slower economic growth rate. It will also show us higher recession, higher unemployment. Now, on the other side, let's say here, this is the opposite. So the AD and the SRAS curve will still intersect, but now it is on the right side of the RAS. This one is a labeling error. Okay, so this is RAS. The horizontal here, the vertical line here will give us the potential output, and this is the actual output. So compared to just now, here we are on the left side of this vertical line. Here we are on the right side of the vertical line, right? You can see the difference. So on the left side, it means that we are not producing as much as we should. Therefore, economy is growing slowly. Unemployment is higher. However, if you produce too much, if you do way too many, then it's going to lead to higher price levels. It will lead to inflation. So in this case, there are too many people buying things, right? It's like crazy. For example, right, let's say the government, they say that, the lockdown measures are now removed, right? We are easing such measures, and people see that the economy is going to recover soon, and they're going to get back the job soon. So everything will be back on track, right? Like before COVID. So what happens is now they are feeling more optimistic, more confident to start spending already. And after having stayed at home for many, many months, right, they were feeling more pent up. So you start to do the revenge spending, right? This also happened about 2 years ago. So the revenge spending happened and people started to come out, I want to buy this, buy that, buy, right? So you keep buying things, let's say in US. So when you keep buying, then the consumption spending was rising very, very fast, right? A lot. So when AD was rising rapidly, right, it will cause the actual output here, you can see this level, to be higher than the potential. So that means optimally we should be producing here, but now we have exceeded. Okay, we have exceeded. So in terms of economic growth, it is a good thing, right? Because you have exceeded your target. In terms of unemployment, it should be okay as well, because there are much fewer people without jobs. So in these two areas, they are okay. But the other problem is you have inflation. Okay, so it comes from two reasons, right? First one, because when everyone is buying something, right, or when everyone is coming out to shop, the firms are very happy, right? Because they see that, hey, the demand is so high, or like everyone is just wanting to buy our products. So we are going to raise prices. Okay, we're going to raise prices. And then, so now two reasons for inflation. So one reason, because everyone is buying things, right? So they want to buy this, buy that, they're rushing to buy things. So the firms are very happy. They see that because everyone is buying, we can raise the prices confidently, right? So they raise the prices, they want to make more profits, right? So they push up the prices. So that's one. Second reason, when the people are buying the goods and services, right? When you're buying this, buying that, at the same time, all these items, they need resources to produce. So we need the production process first. We need the resources first. So when we are selling so many items or so much, we are also using up a lot of resources. So when we use up the resources, then the resources will get depleted. So the resources become very expensive. You have to actually spend more on the resources, and that is going to lead to higher prices later on when they pass to consumers. So the economy is underperforming. So you have recession, you have higher unemployment. At this point, the price level is not an issue. So this is, let's say, during the start of COVID. Then on the other side, you have when things are starting to recover, and then the growth is okay, the unemployment is okay, but the inflation, the price level is not okay, right? It's going far too high. So this is what we experienced, right, from the start of COVID. 2020, right, we had higher unemployment, recession, and then later, 2 years later, when things sort of like turn okay, right, and then you start to face like the problems with inflation, right, as we saw last week, right, I think I showed you guys, inflation went up to 9%, 2022, right now is still a bit on the higher side, but much better already, right, I think it's about 3+%, okay, so it's still on the higher side, but not as crazy as when it first started in 2022. Okay, so this is where you have inflation, and then the unemployment and the growth problems will have disappeared. All right. Okay, so for this, please do take a look. Okay, please do take a look, and then again, you need to understand what AD consists of, the factors that affect AD, what is SRAS, what can affect SRAS, short run, then LRAS, which is long run aggregate supply, what can affect this, what is LRAS about, and when you combine all together, right, we need to understand what do we mean by the recessionary problem, what do we mean by the inflationary problem. So all this here will be the basic. Doesn't sound basic, right? Like sounds too much, but the basic understanding of the diagrams and also the whole macroeconomic situation.